I offer my humble salutations at the divine lotus feet of our dear Lord, Bhagavan Sri Sathya Sai Baba. Thank you so very much for this opportunity. My thanks to Region 3 and Anu, for this is really quite a privilege to be with you and think about our beloved Swami, our Lord, Sri Sathya Sai Baba. I thought to begin, I should start at the beginning and tell you about the very first Baba dream that I ever had. I was in my late 20s at the time, and it was actually my mother who was the first in our family to find out about Sai Baba. She had had dreams, and she had been to India, even had an interview or two, and she really wanted to convince me about Baba. At that time, I had just arrived home to visit, and I was surprised on my arrival to find out that all the family pictures in the house had been replaced with a picture of a man in an orange robe with dark, bushy hair. And I have to say, as a young man, as you know, young men are, that made me a little suspicious. And I told my mother this, and that this whole thing, and despite all her best attempts to share with all the amazing things, could very well be a hoax and not for real. And much to my embarrassment, really, I should say. And one night we argued about it, which I regret. And it was that night of that argument that, of course, I had my first Baba dream. And in the dream, I found myself sitting in an ancient Greek or Roman amphitheater. And there were old men with white beards and white robes sitting all around looking very dignified. And I sat ringside, looking out onto the sand. And in that circular space in the middle of it, to my surprise, I saw myself walking out into the ring and standing there in the middle. And I leant forward a little bit to see what I was saying. I was saying things quite loudly, something about, oh, this is complete rubbish and really shouldn't be trusted. And this rather unpleasant version of me started walking over closer to where I was sitting. I quickly realized that I was saying all this stuff. It was unpleasant. This Sai Baba stuff is rubbish, and it's definitely got to be a hoax. And as this was going on, I looked slightly to my right, and to my great shock, the person that was sitting right next to me was Sai Baba. And he was apparently listening to this unpleasant version of me and was listening very carefully. I was so embarrassed. I was thinking, my gosh, please, are you kidding me? I was trying to make science and cut it out. Save me. What's going on here? But to no avail. The unpleasant me was not listening. And I had to take this terrible embarrassment sitting next to Baba while I was saying that it really wasn't true. Anyway, I was in quite a pickle, to say the least. And it was at that moment, a golden light shone down on me, and every atom of my body was permeated with golden light. The sensation was extraordinary. It felt like being home, a long-lost home. It felt like love. It felt so good that compared to my best day here on earth, let's say that day would be at the beach, having some fun, that day would seem like being in a dungeon. And being in this golden light, nothing else mattered. I wanted nothing else, in fact, to be just in that golden light. And then I could feel myself begin to float up into it. It was heavenly. In fact, nothing I've ever experienced can compare with it. The sensation of floating into this golden light happened 3 times. And then slowly, the light began to recede, fully receded. And I woke up mouthing the words, "Don't go." But it was over. And now I carry this experience with me always, even though it was 30 years ago. I've not experienced anything as sweet as that golden light. Sai Baba says in the Dharma Vahini, those afflicted with the high fever of worldliness can never taste the real sweetness of truth. The fever must subside, and then they appreciate it, the value of things of the spirit. And Baba says, when you listen to my story, you forget the story of the world and live only in my story, until there is no separate story for you to relate. To make you storyless is the purpose of my story. And I can tell you, well, if that golden light is God, then we have nothing to fear. It is just, that was being awareness and bliss. Now, when we think about the world and what's happening, there's so much going on in the world right now. There's so much going on with all of us. And Baba talks so much about the power and the very real benefits of the Gayatri. He says that the Gayatri is a complete prayer for our protection, for our spiritual nourishment, and finally, liberation. One has to chant the Gayatri for a while with discipline to experience it. And Swami says that it's a great engine of power which brings victory and success. And it's for this reason, actually, that I've enjoyed learning many of the different Gayatris. One of my favorites is the Shiva Gayatri, of course. Om Tat Purushaya Vidmahe Mahadevaya Dhimahi Tanno Rudra Prachodayat, which means, oh, the mightiest of gods, the ideal Purusha Mahadev, bless me with the higher intellect and enlighten me with knowledge. It's a very, very powerful mantra. And some years ago, I was sitting in the Sai Center, that's what you see here in our home, and it was just a few minutes before bhajans would start. And to fill the time, I was teaching myself the Shiva Gayatri and playing guitar along with it. And as I did this, a flower fell from the altar, which is something that I take as a very, very positive sign. Whenever a flower falls, I always check with myself. What was I thinking at that moment? How was I feeling at that moment? Was the falling of that flower an answer for me or to a thought that I had? Well, I thought, well, I think I must be doing something right here. And the next week, as I was waiting for everyone to join in for bhajans, I was practicing the Gayatri again, and a flower fell again. So we decided as a center that we'd always start our devotional meetings with Shiva Gayatri, the whole center chanting. So here's a recording of Rani, my wife, and my daughter Sitara and myself chanting the Shiva Gayatri the way we do in our center, Sai Ram. Om Tat Purushaya Vidmahe Mahadevaya Dhimahi Tanno Rudra Prachodayat. Om Tat Purushaya Vidmahe Mahadevaya Dhimahi Tanno
Tanno Rudra Prachodayat.
Sai Ram. So 3 beautiful ohms at the end. Ohms to bring us inner peace. Inner peace, Baba says, is the prime need of all of us. It is the need of mankind, and it's available to us only through great personal spiritual practice and the knowledge of the self. That's the reason why we should all build a strong personal spiritual practice. And that's because life is like an obstacle course. It's shrouded in Maya. It's impossible to make it through successfully alone. And Baba says if you're looking for a good friend to help you, then that friend must be stronger than your adversaries. In fact, in life, there are so many obstacles of all types and sorts. They are the main adversaries, and the only friend who can help you across the vast ocean of life is God. He is the only true friend. Sai Baba is my amazing friend, our amazing friend. It's this special divine relationship that I'm always looking for ways to keep building and to keep his company. Baba says it's absolutely essential that for us spiritual aspirants to understand why morality and spirituality are responsible for facilitating a transformation of the heart and a sacred and holy life. Our personal transformation does require work and surrender, placing all our worries, wishes, and desires at his lotus feet. It's so very important. Baba says, if you want me to be the Sarati or charioteer of your body chariot with its mind horse, then learn to surrender the reins to me. If you want me to be the Sanatana Sarati or eternal charioteer for you, then your surrender should also be Sanatana Sharanagati or eternal surrender. Surrendering to God becomes a lot easier when we know that he's listening to us and responding to us, which, of course, our Baba does with all of us. We just have to be awake and aware to see the signs of his hand in all that we do. Now, to highlight this, I once had a dream where Baba said to me, he said, if I were to ask you to drop everything and come and see me in India, would you do it? I immediately replied, yes, Baba. And then, with a wave of his hand, Baba materialized a large translucent calendar that floated in the air in front of me. And the dates for my trip and the length of my trip were highlighted in red numerals. There was no way I could miss it. I woke up feeling joyfully amazed and in awe of what had just happened. And so, shortly thereafter, I got my ticket and flew to India to see Baba. Now, a moment ago, I mentioned that it's a lot easier to surrender to God when we know that he's listening and responding to us. And so this is the example that I wanted to share with you. This was actually going to be my second trip to see Baba. My very first trip was for his 70th birthday. And it had been quite a physically intense and demanding trip with crowds that were beyond belief and not really being able to get close to Baba and all the ashram rules. And like I had to hand in my passport at the accommodation office and the worries that I might have to rough it and sleep in a shed, and not to mention the constant worry of whether I was able to get close enough to Baba. In fact, on that trip, I had camped out, I think, in row 100 for most of the trip, very, very far back. So for the second trip, I had some concerns and worries about what this second trip would shape up to be like. So I arrived in India and I found myself standing in line outside the accommodations office. I had my passport in my hand, feeling a little bit dazed from a lack of sleep from a very long flight from Los Angeles. And at that moment, I felt someone tap me on the shoulder. It was a devotee. I turned around and he said, I heard a voice in my head that said, I should come down here and ask you if you'd like to stay in my room. I thought, wow, what a relief. So no shed for me. That's just amazing. I said, yes, let's go. How fantastic. And so he led me to a beautiful room in one of the blocks. And I had even a real bed to sleep on with a mosquito net nicely fixed and a fresh pair of sandals that were my size at the door waiting for me. So this was indeed the Lord's VIP service. And after changing into my whites, I went down to darshan, and it's the process of getting into darshan. I chose a line to sit in. It turned out that the line I chose was row 1. Unbelievable. And that's what it was like for the entire trip. I even got Padnamaskar, which is touching the Lord's feet. But perhaps most importantly, Baba proved to me that he had listened to all my thoughts. He had listened to all my wishes, and he fulfilled them. So now Baba says that bhajan is the process of singing your prayers to God, praising his glory and his compassion, and pleading that he may fill you with his grace. Now, this was something that I should have done right there and then to thank him for that beautiful room and that row 1 darshan on my very first day. But I can stop and thank him now. So here's a devotional song that my beautiful wife and best friend Rani was inspired to write one day after hearing me play a few chords on guitar. This song is called Sai Tere Charano Me Hum, meaning, Sai, we offer you our life at your feet. You are our kith and kin. You are my life companion. I find my abode at thy feet.
साई तेरे चरणों में हम कर दे सारा जीवन अर्पण। ओ साई तेरे चरणों में हम कर दे श्री राम कहो, महावीर हार लाए सो कहो, तेरे चरणों में चारों धाम। साई तेरे चरणों में, साई तेरे चरणों में, साई तेरे चरणों में हम कर दे सारा जीवन अर्पण।
Sairam, we can all get so easily carried away in this material world. But how often are we born at the same time of a living avatar? Baba says, in this busy age of fear and anxiety, the remembrance of God and the repetition of his name is the one means of liberation that is accessible to all. That's from Sathya Sai Speaks, volume 13. In Indian Vedic mantras, they are all about energy and frequency and vibration. There was a famous inventor, Nikola Tesla, the great inventor of the powerful coil that was capable of generating high voltages and frequencies that ended up leading to the discovery of new forms of light, like neon light and fluorescence, as well as X-rays. Nikola Tesla said, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy and vibration. And so the question that we should ask ourselves is, are we able to tap into the constant presence of God in our consciousness? Are we able to steady our minds and turn them inward? Have we acquired loving and selfless hearts? And sadly, oftentimes the answer may be not as much as we would want. So what really are the vibrations that hinder, that form a barrier to that inward view? Well, the answer is that it's the vibrations, the thoughts, the desires arising from a heart that has not yet been purified, that form the obstacle to our spiritual growth. It's those negative vibrations coming from our egos that become an obstacle to feeling or experiencing Sat, Chit, Ananda, or being, awareness, and bliss. The being, awareness, and bliss that we would experience if we could feel the constant presence of God in our consciousness. It would be amazing. Baba says that fear and anxiety, lust, anger, greed, attachment, conceit, and hatred, they all block the constant remembrance of God. And it's namasmarana, or the repetition of his name, that is the one means of liberation that's accessible to all. So here's bhajan that my wife Rani wrote. It's about the constant remembrance of God. Jai Sai Ram.
शिरडी धाम चलो रे बनवा, शिरडी धाम चलो रे बनवा, शिरडी में है सतगुरु साई, शिरडी में है सतगुरु साई, शिरडी धाम चलो रे बनवा, शिरडी धाम चलो रे बनवा, शिरडी में है काशी मथुरा, शिरडी में है काशी
Sai Ram. Our sadhana helps build a strong personal spiritual practice. It's a practice that has just one aim: to maintain constant integrated awareness. And in all our Sai Center activities, seva, bhajans, and group prayer, they all play a huge role in the purification of the heart. If you've ever wondered why it's so beneficial to pray in a group, Baba says that the purpose of this type of loud congregational prayers is different from the silent individual prayers. It's a joint, concerted, and mutually helpful effort of spiritual practice to overcome the 6 internal foes of man: lust, anger, greed, attachment, conceit, and hatred. And he's very descriptive. He says, these nocturnal birds infest the tree of life and foul the heart where they build their nests. When we sing aloud the glory of God, the heart is illumined and they cannot bear the light. Besides, the voice that rises from many throats frightens them and they fly away. That's from Sathya Sai Speaks, so volume 13. So group prayer and bhajan, it's the perfect way to dispel the negative vibrations in our hearts. We often get dreams and messages from Baba in those early morning hours when the mind is still quiet and it's a perfect time for God's voice, to hear God's voice and to feel those promptings. So here is one of our favorite bhajans. It's called In the Stillness of the Morning. Sai Ram.
In the stillness of the morning, I listen for your call, Bhagavan. In the stillness of the morning, I listen for your call, Bhagavan. In the stillness of the morning, I listen for your call, Bhagavan. In the stillness of the morning, I listen for your call, Bhagavan. Your touch upon my shoulder
Sai Ram. Baba says that you should let your whole life be a spiritual song. We should believe that God is everywhere at all times and derive strength, comfort, and joy by singing his glory in his presence. Let melody and harmony surge from your hearts. Let all take delight in the love that you express through that song. Now, I'll go back and I wanted to share an experience with you that I think you might find interesting. When I was in my early 30s, my mum announced to me, my mother said that it was high time for me to get married. And it was also about that time that I had a Baba dream. Now, in this dream, I found myself standing in front of a huge throne, and my mother was standing next to me. And my mother said to Baba, who was sitting in that throne looking down at us, she said, "Baba, I have a nice girl for Greg to marry." And Baba looked down at us and looked down from that throne, and he shook his finger and said, "No, no, I have the perfect person for you to marry. And she's right here with me." Waking up from that dream, I knew Baba was going to take care of it. And I didn't bother with anything else in that department. Didn't bother with girlfriends or dating. I knew Baba had it. He had my back. I surrendered it all to him. When we think about surrender, I have to bear in mind that all religions, in fact, advocate surrender. In Christianity, the main principle of surrender is the dying to the self, or the emptying of the self, to allow Christ to live through the believer. Every step of surrender brings the Lord and the devotee closer and closer. In the first stage, the Lord is fully free, and the devotee is fully bound. It's like a cat and a kitten. The cat shifts the kitten about as it wills, and the kitten just mews and accepts whatever happens. This part of surrender, this attitude, is so very gentle, and it's actually within easy reach of all of us. And it's lovely to experience. In the second, the devotee binds the Lord, who is then to that extent unfree. And then in the third stage, it is one of inseparable devotion. The devotee offers all to the Lord, including himself, for he feels that he cannot withhold any part of himself. Complete surrender really means the realization that all is God, and that there is nobody who surrenders, that there is nothing to be surrendered, nor is there anyone to accept a surrender. All is God. There is only God. Of course, it's hard to effect this full surrender, but if man makes even the slightest effort towards it, the Lord himself will confer the courage to pursue it to the end. God will walk with him and help him as a friend, will lead him as a guide, will guard him from evil and temptation, and will be his staff and support. And so, having surrendered that part of my life, I did find it easier to also start surrendering other parts of my life to God, like the outcomes of day-to-day tasks, the small ones at first, and then the bigger ones. It was, at that point in my life, the time of the very first World Youth Conference. And in California, we were so excited. We were all getting our plane tickets, having that great feeling of excitement that one has, knowing that in a couple weeks, we will be with Swami. It was then that I got a phone call from a friend of mine. Her name is Sureka. She had been running a Sai Center for many, many years from her home in Ventura, and she was actually already in Puttaparthi with Baba. And she said to me, guess what? I just had darshan, and I was able to give Baba a letter in it. And it said it would be very nice if you were to marry my sister, who is a nurse in the super specialty hospital. And so here is a picture of Rani and Sai Baba in the kidney ICU, where she worked. So when I heard this, I thought, wow, this is it. I knew the importance about what happens when Baba takes a letter. I knew that it meant, that this was a very powerful message from Baba. There's tremendous meaning in all of that. And so from my point of view, I felt, well, that's it. It's a done deal. Even though I've never seen or met this person, I don't know this person, if God said, I have the perfect person for you to marry, well, then that's it. He took the letter, that's it. And so that's actually, I have to say, that's how I am with Baba. Baba says, just be still and know that I am God. So my mind didn't have to wander in strange directions. I could accept that, and I knew that would be the case. So I arrived in Prashanthi 2 weeks later. There were so many devotees there from all over the world. And just a sea of humanity. And for the very first darshan, I found myself again in row 1. And I knew that this was a precious moment, not to be wasted. And so I was able to grab a tiny pencil from the guy sitting next to me, and then a small scrap of paper from someone sitting on my right, and I wrote a little note. And I said, Dear Baba, do you want me to marry Sureka's sister Rani? And if you take this letter, it means this is the perfect person that you mentioned in the dream. I folded it up and put it in my hands. And up until this point, Baba had never looked at me in any of the darshans. I've actually grown quite accustomed to it. I liked it. It allowed me to look at him and fully enjoy and drink him in and enjoy the darshan. But this time, it was different. The soft darshan music played, and Baba was making his way towards us. It was about 10 feet away from me when he stopped and looked at me. My heart skipped a beat. It was at that moment I tried to lift myself up onto my knees and stretch my hands out to him with that little note. Baba made his way over. He reached forward and gracefully took it out of my hands. It was my first interaction with Baba, which in and of itself, it was amazing to me. He saw me. He took my note. And then I remembered what was in that little letter of mine. And I realized I'm going to get married, or at least I'm going to be asking someone to marry me. And so darshan was soon over, and I found myself in a sea of humanity streaming from the Sai Kulwant Hall. It's estimated that this building can hold as many as 20,000 people on a festival day. So walking amongst all these people coming out, my first job actually was to try and locate my sandals, which I had placed in a very special and strategic spot. That was my task at the moment. But as I was doing that, again, it's this perfect timing of Baba. I walked right into my friend Sureka in that sea of humanity. She was the one that ran the Sai Center in California. And I said to her, you're not going to believe this. Baba just took a letter from me saying that I should marry your sister Rani. It was quite an extraordinary morning that I was having. Well, Sureka was very calm and collected. It seemed quite comfortable with all this. She said, all right, that's interesting. Why don't you tell me all about it, and we'll walk out of the ashram down a little side street, and you can tell me the whole thing. So I described the whole event to her, even how getting row 1 was such a big deal, let alone the Lord of the universe looking at me. And then taking a letter from me saying that I should marry someone that I'd never met before. I was in a state of shock and bliss all at the same time. And it was actually at that moment that Swarupa said to me, well, you know, if you just look over your shoulder, you'll see that Rani, my sister, and my mother are following us, and you can see her. So I thought, oh gosh, okay. Well, I looked over my shoulder, and there she was, a vision of loveliness in a pink sari, with jasmine in her hair. It was incredible. So I quickly looked forward again and thought, wow, this is getting serious. And a sort of slight feeling of nervousness was creeping over me. It was then that we arrived at the sandy banks of the famous Chitravati River that I'd heard so much about this place, where Baba spent time with lucky devotees in the past and materialized things and pulled treasures from the sands. We all sat down and introduced ourselves and made some polite small talk about how the flight was and those sorts of things. But I felt that I ought to come clean. And I said, you know, I've had quite an amazing darshan this morning. Baba took a letter from me, and it said that we should get married. So if it's okay with you, I think we should get married. At that point, I thought it was probably good to pause right there and take a breath and survey the situation. Our little group sitting in the sand that had been so nicely engaged in polite banter a few moments before was now silent, and all eyes were looking at Rani, who, despite the turn of events, was sitting quite serenely. And she said just 3 words, delivered with the grace and style in only a way that a Rani would say it. Rani, by the way, means queen. She said, "We shall see." So I had to make myself, be comfortable with that. Yet, just a couple days later, and some more darshans, Baba blessed Rani for marriage and said to her, "Chala Shantosham," which means that he was very, very happy. And so a date was fixed and we were married. And Baba said in the dream, I have the perfect person and she's right here with me. But I had to make that leap of faith to experience the good fortune of being married to the perfect person for me. And so Sai Baba touched our lives very much so and remains our everything to this day. Our next bhajan that we're going to do for you is called Hari Om. Jai Sai Ram.
Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Namah Shivaya. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Namah Shivaya. Hari Om. Sai Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Namah Shivaya.
Sai Ram. Baba says, I rescue all who worship me and adore me. I have my definition of devotion. I expect those devoted to me to have to treat joy and grief, gain and loss with equal fortitude. This means that I will never give up those who attach themselves to me. Baba does not ever give us up. He's always there when we need him. And I've experienced this phenomenon, it's amazing, loving phenomenon in so many ways. One of the very good example that I'll share with you was that I'd gone on a business trip. I'd left home and had to go and spend a few weeks in a city far away. And I got off the airplane. I was standing all alone in the airport next to the baggage carousel, feeling really like I was a very long way from home. In my mind, I said to Baba, I wish you could tell me that you love me. But how could a wish like that be fulfilled here in public, in a busy airport, standing next to a baggage carousel? I felt a bit gloomy about it. I mean, but then again, he can do anything, can't he? And that's when I felt a slight tickle of something brushing the top of my head. And I looked up to see what it was. And I found it to be a string, or to be precise, it was a mylar streamer that was tied to a very large red heart-shaped balloon with big words written across it that said, I love you. It couldn't have been a clearer sign. And so when we are steadfast, when we are rock solid in our devotion, we can be confident in the grace of the Lord. It doesn't matter where we are, what we're doing, or where in the world we are, we will have Baba's grace. He will be there to assure us and to give us strength. Now, there's a fabulous book called the Sai Saturita, one of my favorites. I'm sure many of you know it. It's the story of Shirdi Sai Baba in his life, the first incarnation. And Baba has a very beautiful quote about this. He says, be wherever you like. Do whatever you choose. Remember this well, that all what you do is known to me. I am the inner ruler of all, and seated in their hearts. I envelop all the creatures, the movable and immovable worlds. I am the controller, the wire puller of the show of this universe. I am the mother origin of all beings, the harmony of the three gunas, the attributes, the pure, passionate, and dull, the propeller of all senses, the creator, preserver, and destroyer. Nothing will harm him who turns his attention towards me. But Maya, or illusion, will lash or whip him who forgets me. All the insects, ants, the visible, movable, and immovable world is my body or form. That was Shirdi Sai Baba. How amazing he was. And a fantastic thing one can do is to read that book in 7 days. You should try it if you haven't done it before. A beautiful form of sadhana, really satisfying and enjoyable. He said that the whole world is God's form. How about that? And that he can move it all around as he wishes. And this was something that I was able to experience as well. It's a type of omnipresence, you could say. One day I was driving back home from work, and I was in thick traffic, as that's how it often is in Los Angeles. And I was listening at the time to a book on tape, so it was a little while back. The book was The Holy Man and the Psychiatrist by Sam Sadweiss. Sam was talking about the amazing interviews that he had had with Baba, and that Baba, however, had said that the inner view is more important than an actual interview. And Baba, of course, as you know, he likes to play with words. And as I drove my car, I realized that it was true that an inner view was more valuable than a short interview. That was my aha moment, that my deep initial desires for an interview with God might have actually been a little misplaced. And at that precise moment, a dusty car pulled up in front of me, and I was looking right at its rear window. It was so dusty that someone had written a message in the dust. And I knew that the message was for me. It had been written for me. And I knew this because it said, "Greg, I love you very much." Signed, me. How can Baba time the traffic and have that car pull in front of me with that message written on the back while I had those thoughts and arrive at the conclusion that the inner view is most valuable? It makes me absolutely, realize that everything is in his hands. The Baba says the most desirable form of wealth is the grace of God. He will guard you just as the eyelid protects the eye. So we don't have to doubt that. And this is something that I've personally been learning. The Baba says we should rely on the grace of God, earn it, keep it. And then whatever the strength of the storm you're in, you can survive it without harm. If we have pure hearts and live his teachings, then his grace automatically flows to us. So I have to often say to myself, I belong to you, Swami. I belong to you. So he has to protect me. And it's for those of us who say, I belong to Swami. He says, there's only one thing you should keep in mind. You should do nothing. Things will happen through you and in spite of you, regardless of what you're doing now. What has to happen will happen. Just be open. We just need Swami's grace. Baba says the law of karma is not an iron law. There are ways to win God's favor and protection. So if we think about it, if we really want to enjoy the healing and soothing tonic of God's grace that can so easily get us through the most difficult of times, each one of us probably already knows the answer. It is sadhana, intense sadhana, and each one of us is at a different point of our journey. And there's a variety of things that can be done in any combination that causes God's grace to start unlocking doors and removing obstacles in our daily lives. The challenge, though, for most of us is to actually do something so that he will take us across this tiresome, exhausting sea of samsara, or worldly existence. So to close, I'm going to leave you with one last message from Baba, one that I love so much. Baba says, "You are my treasure. Even if you deny me, I am your treasure. Even if you say no, I shall be affectionate to you and attach myself to you. I shall take all the trouble to keep my properties safe in my custody. That is to say, in the custody of the Lord, by whichever name you may be calling on him. All the powers I have are for you. I am just the storekeeper, keeping them ready to be given to you whenever you ask for them. My prema shall be given even if you do not ask for it. because it is your right to share in it. I am not influenced by anybody, remember that. There is no one who can change my course or affect my conduct to the slightest extent. I am the master over all. So I would like to thank Region 3 and Anu for this opportunity to share experiences with you. I know I learned so much from listening to other devotees and what they have to share. So it was wonderful for me to be here with you today. And I'd like to leave you all with one final bhajan. Jai Sai Ram.
Nartara